Could you talk about what it was about magic that drew you into doing magic?
When I was a little boy, I either wanted to be a scientist or a magician. That's what I wanted to be. Either wanted to be a scientist or a magician. And by the time I got to high school, I used my analytical skills. And I realized if I wanted to be a scientist, it meant many more years of school. You know, to get a PhD would be like 8 more years of school. My grades in high school were meh. I was one of the students. Things I loved, I got A's in. Things I didn't, not so good. And then living in Fort Lauderdale and knowing people who were cruise ship magicians, and I thought, after high school, I could spend, a couple $100,000, go get a degree so I could get a PhD in physics and, do what. And this was this was before like the internet boom and a lot of other things would have availed themselves. So I thought, or I could put together a stage show and I could be a cruise ship magician. And, for a shy guy, a guy from like 18 years old, coming out of high school and being kind of shy, kind of a bookworm kind of guy, and to realize I could go to college and have more of that, or I could be on a cruise ship surrounded by showgirls and have that. So I said, you know what, the cruise ship opportunity was there, so I went in that direction. But I kept my interest in stuff, and you can be in different spheres. I have a lot of friends that are scientists, and I go to more science conferences than I probably do magic conferences, because that's a thing I go into and I know nothing about, and everything is new and different to me and interesting, and I get asked stupid questions because I'm not a scientist, So that's sort of, the way between the two. But I am a very, very much an analytical thinker, but I think that analytical, but you can be goofy, you can have fun, you can be creative with that. You can just ask deeper questions, I think, and sometimes have more satisfactory answers. Some of my favorite performers are very analytical people. I would say Darren Brown's a very analytical person, Teller's certainly an analytical person, and a number of other people are like that. You don't have to be, but it can be helpful. Yes, young man.
Sir, can you talk a little bit about the experience you've had with the James Randi Foundation and how that started and how you've how that experience has guided you?
So when I was about 15, my dad took me to go see Randy, Amazing Randy, do a lecture at a local magic shop. Now, when I was younger, my dad would wake me up to see Penn and Teller when they were on TV, if they're on the Tonight Show. He'd wake me up to see Johnny, David Copperfield on Johnny Carson or Lance Burt, and he'd wake me up to see Randy. My dad was a fan of Randy. My father was a law enforcement agent, and so my father had a lot of respect for what Randy did in going after bad people who were using magic technique to take advantage of people who were sick or defraud people. And so we went to go see Randy do a lecture, and it was great. It was like my first kind of real big introduction to skepticism. We got his book Flim Flam. He became a really good friend of the family. We'd come to the house, and Randy, followed me with my magic career and always would give me advice. I could go over and ask him questions about stuff. And he also knew a lot about science, knew a lot of scientists, so I could, talk to him about that. And I got to meet some really amazing people like Marvin Minsky and who's an artificial intelligence pioneer, mathematician. And Randy in the 90s was given a donation from an internet gazillionaire to start a foundation to promote critical thinking. And at the time, I'd been doing a program where I would go into schools ever since I was in high school, and I've mentioned before, talk about magic and critical thinking, because this was something I very much loved, was that connection between how we're fooled and how we see the world. And magic and science are very, very much connected. They're not, magic is using a scientific principle to convince people you're using magic. Science is taking something we don't understand, i.e. magic, and figuring out how that works. And there's a back and forth between the two. So Randy knew about the program I was doing in the schools, and he talked about that. He brought it up to Johnny Carson, and Johnny Carson said, I'd like to fund that. And so Johnny Carson, gave a grant to the foundation, which then made it possible for me to bring that in. And then with Randy, I handled the $1 Million Challenge since he's had $1 Million challenges in the 1990s. He had a $10,000 one before that, to anybody who could prove that they had psychic powers. And so Randy brought me on board to help him with the challenge. And so I would go to laboratories where somebody said, I can read with my fingertips, or I can see what's in another room, and I would set up experiments to test this from the point of view as a magician, but with, I have a very, very deep appreciation for scientific methodology, what are double-blind tests, how do you eliminate the human factor and test the thing that you want to test? And so I spent several years handling that challenge for him and working with him and devising tests for testing everything from telekinesis, psychokinesis, and never found any evidence of it. And I very much willingly wanted to see this stuff. I wanted to see these things. I wanted them to be true. And it was not my skepticism that prevented that. It's just you become very, very aware of pathological science. And when it comes to scientists, the areas in which we can be fooled. Psychologists are very easily fooled by statistical things. Physicists are very fooled by things where humans are trying to deceive them. And you realize just sort of our own, we all have these sort of blind spots. And I would see that with magicians too.
Were you already very into magic at the time that you were devising these experiments?
Oh yeah, no, I'd been professional. I'd already worked around the world. I'd already worked on cruise ships and toured overseas and stuff.
Could you talk a little bit about what you started doing when you first were doing magic?
So the first tricks I did, my grandfather taught me. My first trick, like my first card trick, and then my father would encourage me, would teach me some magic tricks. And so my grandfather was really skilled at like some coin stuff. He was very good. He was very good at sleeving. I didn't know that's what he was doing at the time. I had to go see a Rocco lecture to go, oh, that's what he did. And so I picked up a little bit of some of that technique, and then I really gravitated towards TV, or towards, like what I saw on TV, because seeing David Copperfield, because that was the only at that point I lived in the Pacific Northwest, and the only magician I ever got to see was like David Copperfield. And so that was my impression of a magician early on. By the time I was, when I was 11 or 12, I was doing some stupid tricks, and I didn't have really a lot of magic influences. The only magic I'd ever see would be like a videotape, and I'd go see something in a magic shop, and I'd be like, all right, let me see how this works, and then I'd go do it. And I was very creative though, and then I kind of got rid of that creativity when I started trying to perform in production type shows, because I didn't know how to put in my creativity. So by the time I was about 14, I realized, I walked into a magic shop, I picked up a Genie magazine, and there was a Paul Osborne plan. And I looked at this, I'm like, wow, this is how to build one of those illusions. I showed my dad, and we went and we built it. And now I'm friends with Paul Osborne. I've had my stuff appear in his books, which is awesome. But it was Paul Osborne Illusions that showed me that these are things you can build in your garage. And then I got into the illusions because I loved the idea. I'd be the shy kid at school, and then one day out of the year, the talent show, I'd go on there, I'd go do 20 minutes, or they'd let me do half the show, and I'd bring out all the illusions and stuff, and I would do a big illusion show. And that always, people treated me differently after that. It was amazing, because, one of my favorite memories was, I was probably 15 years old, I'm walking down the hallway, and one of the teachers passes by and goes, hey, you're like David Copperfield. And this kid goes, I didn't know who this kid was. He goes, no, he's better than David Copperfield, because he was